and good afternoon and good morning, everyone. A very warm welcome to all of you joining us today. Both are regular participants from the Making Access Happen community. I'm sorry I'm not able to see you all, and those who may be joining us for the first time. On behalf of Digestive Cancers Europe, I want to thank you for taking the time to be part of this webinar, which we hope will help you understand patents better, and most importantly, how they influence patient access to treatment. I have to admit that this was a topic I once thought was quite straightforward, and that patent is a patent with a simple expiration date. But as I started learning more, I realized how complex it really is and how often patent systems can act as a barrier to competition, to price reduction, and ultimately access to life-saving medicines. As I have mentioned at the beginning, today's webinar is a continuation of the work we began under the Making Access Happen initiative, launched in Munich in June 2024. There, our community developed the Making Access Happen consensus statement, which can be found on Digestive Cancers Europe website, which is a foundational piece that identifies key challenges to access across countries and disease areas. And today we are building on that work by focusing specifically on one of those major barriers, patents. And the timing couldn't be better. We are holding this discussion during the Global Biosimilars Awareness Week, a moment when we are paying special attention to access, competition, and the promise of biosimilars in improving patient outcomes. Our objective today are threefold. First, to understand better what patent protection means and how it impacts patient access, including how various tactics can delay it. Second, to hear from advocates from around the world about the activities they have undertaken, giving you practical tools to educate your own communities and advocate for patent reforms. And third, to connect with the growing global movement that is taking action on patent barriers. Understanding patents isn't just about legal or technical knowledge, it's about the empowerment, because when we as advocates understand the system, this enables us to engage more strategically, to influence policy more effectively, and ultimately to drive change that brings medicines to patients sooner. So today it's not about learning theory, it's about building practical advocacy skills, the kind that make a difference in real-world access. I have to admit that for me, one of the biggest challenges today will be not mixing patients and patents. Let's see how many times I do it. And with that, I would like to thank you once again for joining us and for your continued commitment to the Making Access Happen community. Now I'll hand back to Eva to guide us through the next part of the session.
Thank you, Sarona. And now let me introduce our first speaker, Sneha Dave. Sneha is the founder and executive director of Generation Patient, a US-based organization dedicated to empowering patient advocates. Sneha brings a unique perspective as both a patient advocate and policy expert. She has extensive experience in translating patient experiences into policy action and has been instrumental in advancing patient-centered approaches to healthcare policy. Today, Sneha will share insights on how patient advocates can build their voice and influence in patent policy discussions. Over to you, Sneha.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much, Eva, and the rest of the team for having me. I'm going to actually go ahead and share my own slides just because I made some last-minute edits, as I typically do. But it is really good to be here and to meet everyone. So I am Sneha. I'm based in the state of Indiana in the United States, and I run Generation Patient, which is a patient advocacy group representing young adults roughly between the ages of about 18 to 34 with chronic and rare conditions from lupus, arthritis, Crohn's disease, Lyme disease, a wide range of conditions. And our staff team is currently comprised entirely of young adult patients, and so our work is really led by lived experience. And so we have two big arms that we focus on. One is building community. So we've done over 650 peer support meetings over the last few years, and really believe in peer connection as a tool, not only to build community and reduce isolation, but also to build coalitions and mobilize around systems issues that are impacting our community, which is how, in part, we came to reforming the patent system as a part of our policy work. But we have a variety of other work and policy areas that we address. And while we are US based, we also have quite a few community members that we work with regularly in South Asia and East Africa through our peer support work. But our policy work is a bit more US based. So we began our policy work a few years ago, again, recognizing some of the real affordability challenges that were happening within our community through conversations and through our peer support work. And I think this quote by Christine Hayes is really telling, that hope is no good if a drug is developed and our folks cannot afford it. And I think that is just a core premise of why Generation Patient believes so strongly in reforming the patent system as a tool to lower drug prices and to ensure more access and affordability for patients, both in the US, but also looking at the patent system abroad, a lot of opportunities to reform, create reforms there as well. So we established our health policy lab in January 2022, but we've been doing policy work quite a bit longer than that as well. I'll move a little bit quickly to get more into the patent work that we do, but we've divided our health policy work in three general stages. Some of these buckets overlap, but the preclinical side, we focus on patents. In the clinical stage, we focus on increasing representation of young adults in trials and ensuring data disaggregation within trials. And then our post-market work is really focused on increasing oversight of pharmaceutical ads on Meta and TikTok, which is a US and New Zealand specific issue, not really so much an issue for our European and colleagues or in other countries, since it's illegal everywhere else but New Zealand and the US. So I mentioned we began engaging in the patent system, we have a more specific anecdote as to why. So Humira, which is produced by AbbVie and now many other biosimilar drug companies, adalimumab, we began noticing a lot of access issues within our community, particularly for Humira. And as we were looking at what the root cause was for AbbVie being able to charge a very, very high price for Humira, we started to understand that patents were a huge reason why. We noticed that AbbVie had filed numerous patents, many of which were after FDA approval and were on the device or on essentially not the active ingredient or the primary ingredient. So on areas of Humira that were maybe less impactful or less clinically meaningful for patients, and then keeping our drug prices high and keeping a monopoly on this therapeutic. So we submitted written testimony in 2021. And since then, we've engaged in reforming the patent system as a key part of our policy efforts to lower drug prices. And I'll share a little bit more about what we've done. But I want to talk a little bit more about the young adult patient specific demographic. So a lot of times, especially in the United States, the focus is really on older adults or adults as far as access and affordability challenges. And we see so many access and affordability challenges for our young adult patient demographic. So for our community members, we know that the ability to afford medications and not have to worry about that means being able to pursue careers, navigate where you want to live, moving geographically, family planning, college, all of that factors into the young adult patient experience, and not being able to afford a prescription drug really takes away from all those opportunities and is a really big barrier for so many in our community. And so we also know that a lot of our community members are in between insurance, which is particularly difficult in the United States. And at the age of 26, a lot of our community members get kicked off their parents' insurance and are in this time period of often not having insurance or going on a public option. And during that time, the ability to access generics in particular is very important for our community. I'll move really quickly. So going into what is a patent, and I understand Julia is probably going to talk a little bit more about this, so I'll keep this very brief, but essentially a patent allows someone the exclusive right to make, use, or sell their invention for a certain period of time to allow exclusivity and to reward inventions that a particular drug company or really any company has created. And something that's really important to note is that this invention has to be new, useful, and not obvious. And a lot of times we see brand name companies actually patenting things that are obvious or are not necessarily novel. And this becomes where we see a lot of patent games and where it's really important for the public to be able to challenge bad or weak patents. And so we see the patent system being used in ways that it was not intended to, and therefore creating access and affordability challenges for patients. Let's see. Okay. And so how do patents relate to prescription medications? I think I've talked about this a little bit, but we know that when a pharmaceutical company develops a new medication, they can patent any new or unique aspects of that medication, such as the active ingredient, the formula, the delivery mechanism, the device, such as the way that the therapeutic is given to a patient. So whether that's an injection or an infusion, the packaging, etc. And once a new drug is developed, it is marketed under a patent protected brand name company, and these patents give the company exclusive right to sell the drug for 20 years from the patent's filing date. And during this time, no other company can enter the market, which means that the brand name company has a monopoly and will essentially be able to control the price of the therapeutic. And that is how it works in the United States. I cannot speak for internationally, but it is, I feel like the United States is one of the most difficult patent systems for patients in keeping biosimilars and generics off the market for years from patients. And so we know that patents can incentivize innovation and inventions, and patents are really important, but when they're abused and when they're misused is when it creates really big barriers. And we know that the abuse of the patent system really slows the ability for cheaper alternatives, generics and biosimilars to come to the market as well. And generic drugs are crucial for promoting competition, and not only do they cost less for patients, but they can drive down prices overall, and they can save both patients money, but also the healthcare system money in general as well, which is really crucial for sustainability and wider access and affordability. And so AbbVie is given as a case example. It is not the only case example by any means of patent games that happen and create barriers for patients. But I think the broader theme that there have been so many companies merging and creating essentially monopolies is really telling of the need to increase more advocacy for reforming the patent system. So we know that between 1995 and 2015, 60 pharmaceutical companies merged into 10. And between 2005 and 2015, 78% of drug patents were related to drugs already on the market. So they weren't really even new or necessarily extremely or very meaningful to patients. And as I mentioned before, we know that over 100 patents were granted to Humira after FDA approval, which is really telling of the fact that these might be patents on areas of Humira that were not necessarily as meaningful to patients or meaningful changes to patients. I'm going to skip the slides just for the sake of time. But I know you all will have access to these slides, and I know they're text heavy, but so loopholes in the patent system. So I've kind of shared that there's a variety of ways that the patent system can be misused and essentially keep drug prices high for patients. And one loophole that has been used in the past is to pay competitors to delay selling a generic to keep prices high. This is called pay for delay. Another tactic is to make small changes in medication, formula, packaging, delivery to extend patents and keep pharmacies from substituting a generic, which is called product hopping. And the third is filing for a lot of patents, so creating these dense web of patents that essentially will patent everything under the sun, and this makes it hard for generic and biosimilar drug companies to enter the market and be able to sell cheaper versions of these high-cost therapeutics. So the challenges with the patent system is that patent system is not just being used to recoup the initial investments and cover the costs of production. So we know that research and development costs should be recouped because we know it takes a lot to develop, and often, these companies will take government funded research and scale them or grow them, but there has to be a balance of making sure that there's not full market exclusivity for so long that it prevents patients from getting access to these therapeutics. So there is a way to balance incentivizing innovation and fair inventions with also affordability, and those are not mutually exclusive concepts. And so piling on multiple patents slows the creation and emergence of life-saving medications, which means that medications are not coming to the market fast enough for patients. A few years of a difference can make a huge difference for a patient to be able to afford and to be able to have a better quality of life if they're able to access a generic or biosimilar. And generics and biosimilars are comparatively more affordable. However, there are a lot of other systems changes that need to happen with PBMs, with insurers, with hospitals to increase uptake of biosimilars and generics too. So while the patent system is hugely essential and a root cause of many of the unaffordability challenges, it is still really important for patients and patient groups to think about other aspects of the system that are creating barriers to access and afford biosimilars and generics. So now moving on to our work a little bit more. So we have been engaging in the patent system for the last couple of years, and also a lot of other health policy issues. So we have our Health Policy Scholars Program, which is designed to train and educate young adult patients to engage in policy topics, complex policy topics. And last year, our program focused exclusively on the patent system. And so I don't know why you aren't able to see the videos here, but we have our scholars that created videos of different complex topics to explain to other patients and patient groups on how these technical barriers create access and affordability challenges. And this is myself and Peyton, who's one of our health policy scholars and who's our health policy lab co-chair this year. So Peyton is really guiding a lot of our health policy work this year at the White House, celebrating some of our work to lower prescription drug prices for young Americans under the last administration. The Biden administration. But so we also have a patent reform primer that we've created for patients because we know how complicated and opaque the patent system is. And I think that's one of the reasons why it's even more important for patients to be involved and engaged in the patent system, because it's so technical. And in some ways, it feels like it is meant to keep patients out and the public out. And so for us, we are very passionate about breaking down complex topics and making sure that patients have access to education to be able to advocate for these very technical topics that we still are certainly learning so much about, but have made progress in over the last couple of years. Another way that Generation Patient has engaged beyond patient education is with the United States Patent and Trademark Office, and within your country, there is certainly a patent and trademark office that I'm sure you can engage in. And I think one thing to note is that there's not often a straightforward way to engage with the patent and trademark office within your country. I mean, at least in the United States, there has not been. And it's really important for patients and the public to be able to write letters, to send emails to the Patent and Trademark Office. One way you can do this is to send an email saying that you're a patient or a patient advocacy group and request a meeting with their public engagement person, or if they don't have a public engagement person, someone can become the public engagement person, and then you can just have a meeting, share your concerns. And I think that's one way that is really important for the Patent and Trademark Office and these agencies to know that the public cares and that patients are looking at what decisions are being made on behalf of the public and on behalf of our group. So we this is just a slide, I guess, sharing that we spoke at the United States Patent and Trademark Office and the Food and Drug Administration's listening session. And this was a novel collaboration, which we have yet to see great progress from, but a collaboration between the FDA and PTO to try to essentially create more accountability for the industry to make for the brand name pharmaceutical companies to make accurate statements and to both agencies and to have accountability across agencies as well. And so we spoke at that. We've also submitted numerous comments. So another way, and this slide is really to illuminate that, another way to engage is to submit comments to rulemaking processes or guidance documents that a patent and trademark office or your patent and trademark office might release. And so we've submitted numerous comments over the last few years to the PTO and have always made sure to make the engagement person at the PTO know that we've submitted a comment on behalf of the public interest. And there's very few groups and patient groups that are engaged in reforming the patent system, which again is why it's so important for us to be able to be at these administrative agencies. I think I should probably hurry up now, so I will make this a little bit quicker. But there's many ways to engage in patent reform. So I mentioned there's agency engagement, so there's the European Patent Office. I think most folks might be within coming from the EU here today, but I'm not sure. And then in the United States, there's the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office, the Federal Trade Commission, the Department of Justice, which are all agencies that touch the patent system. There's many more that touch the patent system, but these are ways to submit letters, to reach out to people, to really share your concerns as a patient group as to the access and affordability challenges that your patient population is facing. And there's lawmaker engagement. So there's a few different topics that we are engaged in and are excited about. And we have learned a lot from Sandoz on serial patent litigation and are very excited about solutions addressing serial patent litigation, which might be talked about later, but just to bring that up. But there's work that we've done in patent thickets. So Generation Patient supports the Ethic Act, which is bipartisan, a very in our opinion, uncontroversial, a balanced solution to address patent thickets, which again is the over patenting and just patenting of everything under the sun, basically, from brand name companies. And then we also are focused on advocating against harmful legislation. So there has been a lot of efforts in the United States to broaden patent eligibility, and we believe that ourselves, alongside a small coalition of access to medicines groups, last year were instrumental in stopping one of these really harmful pieces of legislation from moving forward in the Senate. And this year, we've also worked with our small coalition to make sure that even though there was a hearing for this harmful piece of legislation, that lawmakers understand that the patent system, while it touches every aspect of our life, has very unique implications on prescription drugs. And so we cannot be looking at the patent system the same as like a golf ball or other products. We have to be looking at prescription medications very differently because they are essential, as we all know, as patients. And then there have been also efforts to remove the ability for the public to challenge weak patents against something that's called the Patent and Trial Appeal Board at the Patent and Trademark Office. And for us, we see the need to increase the ability to challenge bad patents against the Patent and Trial Appeal Board, or with the Patent and Trial Appeal Board, not remove that ability. And so that's an effort that we are really excited to engage more on, is that as patients, we should also have the power to help inform what is a clinically meaningful change and what is a clinically meaningful invention that would warrant extra exclusivity. And that is not happening to the extent that it needs to be happening, which is why public accountability is so important as well. I think I'm going to switch past the slides, these slides as well. Just, I think maybe relevant for this group is addressing serial patent litigation, which Julia might go more into, maybe not, but it's a really exciting new area that we see as a positive opportunity for legislative reform in the coming months or coming years, to ensure that brand name companies are not continuing to litigate after therapeutics are already on the market and already accessible to patients. So it's really important to address both serial patent litigation, but also patent thickets and product hopping and pay for delay tactics that are really crucial for ensuring more timely patient access. And one thing that I'll just say before I will end is a very easy step, I think, for patient groups is to ask for more communication and transparency within the Patent and Trademark Office. Right now in the United States, there is not a formal mechanism that the Patent and Trademark Office communicates to the public and people who are not necessarily filing patents but want to know more about how patent decisions are made. So I think there's a huge opportunity for patient and public groups to request more information on how patents are granted, and patent quality standards, and making sure that, again, when patents are granted, they actually matter and are meaningful to patients and not on all the extraneous things like devices, which are important, but not necessarily, again, warranting of extra monopoly or exclusivity periods. So building credibility, I guess that was not my last slide. I think it's really important. So generation patient is one of the very few patient groups in the United States that is independent of all private healthcare industry funding. So we declined all pharmaceutical, insurance, PBM funding. And one thing that we found is that it does build credibility with lawmakers and agency officials when we share that we don't take any private healthcare industry funding, or if you do, then sharing that upfront builds credibility and at least creates this understanding of where you're coming from. So we feel like that's really important. Just disclosure of funding sources is really helpful. Informing yourself on the technical aspects of the patent system, it takes time and a little bit of effort, but there are resources that we've created, but also so many other groups have created that can help you understand the patent system. And also, don't feel like you have to know everything about the patent system to be able to engage and to use your voice. Again, even just setting up a meeting or reaching out to someone to figure out how they're thinking about patient experiences is a great way to start. Connecting with IP researchers in the patent space has been so helpful for us in the United States to find researchers who can help break down some of these topics to us over the last few years has been instrumental. And then balancing narratives with solutions. So one thing that we always try to do is we have lived experience as young adult patients, which is so important and so invaluable, but it's also important to balance that with technical solutions and what we feel like lawmakers can envision and what we feel like agency officials can envision to create a more patient-centered patent system. And last is just to be confident. It's very nerve-wracking to be in some of these spaces, especially when you might have not started out to address the patent system as the reason why you got into patient advocacy. But it is a real opportunity for you and for your group to represent patients and some of the most pressing needs of our community, which oftentimes is accessing and affording life-saving therapeutics. And the patent system is a clear opportunity for reform that can incentivize really novel inventions and focus brand name companies' efforts on novel inventions rather than marginally beneficial therapeutics, while also making sure that these therapeutics are affordable, which is a priority for us as a patient group. So with that, I will pause there. I will feel free to contact me if you have any questions, but thank you so much for having me. And I'm not sure if I am able to stay for the Q&A, but I will try to be back if my other commitment ends before then.
Thank you so much, Sneha, for that insightful presentation that really sets foundation for understanding how patient advocates can engage with patent policy. I know that you've got to dash to your FDA meeting and wish you the best of luck and hope that you will be able to join us back, but understand that you may not be able to. And thank you so much. And we'll be holding the questions at the panel discussion, but please do continue to submit any sort of your questions in the Q&A tab. So next, I'd like to introduce Julia Pike, who will help us to understand the technical aspects of patent and current trends. Let me just see if I can share the slide again then. So Julia is the global head of intellectual property at Sandoz. Julia has deep expertise in pharmaceutical patents and has been at the forefront of addressing patent barriers that delay patient access to affordable medicines. Her work focuses on promoting fair and balanced patent systems that support both innovation and access. Over to you, Julia.
Thanks, Ava. And so perhaps I'll add a little color along the lines of what Sneha said. Sandoz is a generic pharmaceutical company, so we need a brand side industry that is thriving, that is successful, and is producing lots of new medicines. As a patient, that's also obviously ideal for me. And a vitally important part of making sure that those companies continue to be incentivized to do that is that there is a robust patent system that is making sure they have that period in which they can recover their R&D costs and potentially look forward to paying for the next one. But the role of generic companies is to bring competition as soon as those patent barriers are out of the way, because we've learned from experience that the impact of generic and biosimilar competition is incredibly important for innovation. Firstly, nobody's lazier than a monopolist. If you knew you could sell the one product and not have to ever develop another product and you would continue to make money, the incentive for you to move on to the next product is very small. So it's incredibly important that you have someone chasing you. The other thing that's incredibly important in how generics improve innovation and improve access is that when a generic medicine becomes available, when a biosimilar medicine becomes available, not only is it more affordable, but prescribing guidelines change. Increased numbers of patients can get access to the best possible care. So while it's incredibly important that we make sure we have a robust patent system, it's equally important to make sure that it hasn't gone overboard and that it's still serving the needs of you guys and all of us as patients, rather than being tilted too heavily in favor of granting patent protection. So Ava, if you could kick us off with my next slide. Sandoz is a world leader in off-patent medicine. And what I'm going to show you today a little bit is how there's actually no such thing as an off-patent medicine. And building a little bit on what Sneha has said, there are a number of different tools that branded companies have available to them in order to maintain their monopoly, to extend their monopoly and make their product as profitable as possible. Now, I'm not going to talk about all of these today. I simply do not have time, but I'm more than happy to engage with questions about any of them or to speak to folks offline. Today, we're going to focus on what we call divisional patent strategies, or the divisional game. In a recent investigation of this practice, and I think this was very cute, it's unusually light-hearted for a government agency, the competition division of the European Commission referred to the divisional patent game as whack a patent. So they say whack a patent because a patent will be granted. Companies like Sandoz will challenge it. Now, each one of those challenges is incredibly expensive, depending on the country we're talking about. It could be anywhere between $50,000 for an opposition at the European Patent Office, all the way through to what happens in the US, where it could cost you as much as $25 million to litigate a patent matter. So every whack of that hammer is incredibly expensive. But in the game of whack a patent, we will hit one patent and we will defeat it in litigation, only to have several others, identical scope, identical invention, pop up in a serial manner. And that's a problem both in Europe and in the US. the consequence of this divisional game, the ultimate consequence of this divisional game in the US is what Sneha was referring to before, serial patent litigation. This practice where you get a patent granted and sue someone with it, and then you get another patent granted and then sue someone with that, and then get another patent granted and sue someone with that at an incredible expense time after time. In Europe, the game of whack a patent plays out a little bit differently, and I'm going to focus on this one because right now there is very intense scrutiny on this issue in Europe, and there is a real opportunity for us to engage in reform. And I think it's a perfect time for voices to be heard on this divisional game issue. So just quickly to level set a little bit around why I say there is no such thing as an off-patent medicine. With every pharmaceutical product has a slightly unique patent landscape, but they more or less come together the same way. A branded company will invent a new medicine, a new active ingredient, you heard Sneha call it. And of course, as soon as they've got that new medicine, they will file a patent to it because they want to make sure that nobody else can use that new medical invention for a limited period of time. And we call that the active ingredient patent. You see it as the first one filed there. They'll then try and figure out what that drug can be used for, and they'll try and figure out how to get that drug into a formulation so that they can give it to patients. And so you'll see they figure out what the first indication is, and they figure out what the formulation is, and they will file patents to those. Now, once you can get a pharmaceutical product into the human body and you know what a condition is that you want to treat, the company will start large-scale clinical trials. I don't need to talk to patient groups about clinical trials. This is something you guys are incredibly familiar with. But they'll start those large phase clinical trials with the ambition, once those are finished, of getting their product approved. Now, two interesting things happen with pharmaceuticals once that product is approved. The first thing is, in pretty much every country around the world, those pharmaceutical companies are guaranteed a period of what we call regulatory exclusivity. That's effectively a period of time when a generic and biosimilar competitor cannot seek approval for their version of the drug. But what also happens is that they can ask for the patent term of that active ingredient, that key medical invention of this new active substance. They can ask for that active ingredient patent to be extended. We call that a patent term extension globally, and here in Europe, we call it an SPC. Now, the effect of that SPC or patent term extension is to make sure that pharmaceutical companies with their new medicines get 15 years of exclusivity on the market, right? It's to make sure that the time they lost in that original active ingredient patent term, that 20-year original term, while they were trying to get through those regulatory processes, is compensated. And it's usually the expiration of those patents that have the patent term extensions that set the earliest possible date that a generic and biosimilar company like Sandoz can bring competition to market. But that's not where the patent filing finishes. You will see that over time, they will also file patents directed to dosage regimes, manufacturing processes, second indications. And in both the US and in Europe, they won't just file one version of that formulation patent, they'll file several copies. And so what ends up being created is a wall of patents that's not just tall, it's often quite deep. And that creates a fairly significant obstacle. Sneha was referring to this concept in her presentation as well, this idea of primary protection. In nerdy IP parlance in the pharmaceutical space, we call that compound patent and that patent term extension and the regulatory exclusivity primary protection, because nobody can launch a generic or biosimilar competitor for that product while those rights are ongoing. We refer to the rest of the landscape as secondary protection because, as Sneha was explaining, those aren't patents that are directed to that core medicine. They're not directed to that key medical ingredient. They're directed to smaller, less material aspects of that marketed product. So we have that distinction between secondary and primary protection. It's very, very rare that any generic company challenges that primary protection. So in pretty much every case for a branded pharmaceutical company, they end up getting as much as 15 years on market without any competition. Now, from where we sit, we think that's a fair compensation for the time and effort that's gone into making sure that medicine gets to market. We've seen studies that show that products, particularly oncology products, will often pay off their research and development costs. 90% of them will have paid off their research and development costs by year 8 on the market. So well short of the 15-year term that companies are currently getting. We find that roughly half of them, the majority of them, in fact, have paid off those estimated R&D costs by year 3. So we are going to be talking primarily in the context of the divisional game, whacker patent, serial patent litigation regarding these secondary patents, not that primary protection. Next slide, please, Ava. Now, don't be daunted by how much is on this slide. We'll talk you through it. But this is a recent example of the game of whacker patent, or the divisional game that played out here in Europe, and that ultimately was investigated by the European Commission. What you see here is actually not that uncommon. All of these patents on this, the parent patent, divisional 1, divisional 2, divisional 3, and divisional 4, all cover the same invention. They all cover the same invention. They all expire on the same day. But they were obtained sequentially. What that meant was, for generic companies trying to bring a generic version of this product to market, there was always something in their back pocket that they could sue us with that we hadn't yet had time to revoke, right? So if you look at how this played out, the generics were actually incredibly successful in revoking this second patent. They took down the parent in 2017, they took down the second divisional in 2021, and then finally got rid of all of the remaining copies of this patent by 2024. And these are all effectively copies of each other. But during that time, right, so imagine a world where there had been one version of that product and it had been finally and permanently revoked in 2017. There would have been nothing stopping generic competition from bringing a more affordable version of this product to market. But instead, what happened is that all of the generics that were trying to bring a version of this product to market got caught in multiple litigations across all of Europe on those other divisionals. We estimate that those companies probably spent about $50 million trying to defend themselves. And in those companies you see highlighted there, patients in those countries did not get access to a generic version of this product when they should, because courts issued injunctions stopping generics from launching using these serial divisionals. Not the original patent that was revoked, right? But these serial divisionals that were applied over time. This is a classic example of the divisional game. And what's interesting about that is the European Commission ultimately investigated and said, we don't think this is good practice. We think this practice of serially obtaining and suing on these patents, this game of whacker patent, is not okay. And so for all of these markets where generic competition was delayed, it ultimately issued a fine late last year of around 463 million euro. Now, I know that seems like a lot of money, but the issue with this is none of that 463 million euro is going to you, the patients, or the payers. It's a fine issued by the European Commission. It goes into the European Commission's coffers. But the patients who waited for this product in all of these markets and could not access it at an affordable price at the right time will never be made whole by this fine. And it's not the only time that, and this was an MS product, it's not the only time that this divisional game has hurt patients with multiple sclerosis. This sequential obtaining and litigating on patents has impacted MS patients also with respect to dimethyl fumarate, which is Biogen's Tecfidera, and fingolimod, Novartis's Gilenya, both of which are incredibly important disease-modifying therapies in MS, and both of which were have been delayed from launching in the European market because of this serial patent practice. And I think the objective of the European Commission when it issued that very large fine was that companies would stop using the whacker patent game. What we have seen so far is that that's not true. Companies continue to use this strategy even though that fine has been issued. And Aoife, you can go ahead and put the whole animation forward on this product. But this is a product that we've seen, that we're monitoring because Sandoz is currently developing a biosimilar version of this product. But this is another game of whacker patent that is underway now. Sandoz and other biosimilar companies are going to do all they can to get a biosimilar version of this product to market in 2031. But as you can see from this landscape, we have a lot of hurdles in that secondary protection space to overcome in order to get there. And one of the most, as you'll see in those first two patents, the formulation patent and the first indication, which is a combination of this product, is an indication for the combination of this oncology product with another product. We already see that they're into the second and third wave of the serial patents, serial identical patents being filed with respect to some of these secondary patents. Sandoz is going to do all we can to resolve those in a timely manner, but it is not impossible. In fact, it's quite likely that at some point in 2029, there will be a version of one of these patents that just pops up in time and pops up at a time when companies that are trying to get to market by 2031 will find it incredibly difficult to resolve that patent issue in time, despite the fact that we had already whacked two previous versions of that patent in this circumstance. And with this particular product, every single minute of delay matters. This is an incredibly successful product. We estimate that in Europe alone, it's probably earning something like $36 million a day. Now, if these were good patents, if they were valid patents, and it supported us being delayed from market, I couldn't rightly fight about $36 million a day. But the real key to why we're talking about this divisional patent game when it comes to these secondary patents is this. When we challenge those secondary patents, only 1 in 10 of them survive. And I know I've skipped a slide, Aoife, you're being very professional. Only 1 in 10 of them survive, right? So about 89% of these secondary patents, when we challenge them, are ultimately either completely revoked or materially limited in the invention that they protect. You can just skip to the next one and I'll talk to that one instead. But that's for us why this practice of serially hopping from patent to patent is really problematic, because it means I don't have time to get rid of all of them before the earliest possible date on which we can launch. And I think as an objective for all of us, it would be good for all of us if we were able to obtain certainty about what patents should properly stop the launch of competition. But unfortunately, this is a game we see played out time and time again. And you can go backwards one slide for me, Aoife. We've seen this happen on multiple products. It happens regardless of the therapy area. It happens across a number of different companies, and it's quite a prolific practice that we have this sequential filing of patents that makes it really difficult for us to get rid of them in time. Because Sandoz is incredibly committed to making sure we can get rid of those obstacles. It's core to our business. It's also core to my job. But companies like Sandoz spending time getting rid of those serial secondary patents has real consequences, not just in terms of access, but we did a study that looked at the last 170 patents that were challenged, important pharmaceutical patents that were challenged at the European Patent Office. And not only did we find that only 1 in 10 of them more or less survived as granted, but we learned that if companies like Sandoz hadn't been so committed to getting rid of those obstacles, the European healthcare system would pay somewhere around 200 billion more for those products than would otherwise be the case. They would be waiting up to 8 years for the medicines that were impacted by that strategy. So when we talk to you about this divisional game and we talk to you about it being something that impacts patients, we definitely have the numbers to back it up. And I think if you could go to my last slide for me, Aoife, now is a really good time to be talking about this issue as patients. As I mentioned, the European Commission and the competition arm of the European Commission is interested in this practice. And because of the advocacy of that work by the European Commission and the advocacy of another number of other groups, it's currently on the agenda of the European Patent Office. And you heard Sneha speak earlier, and I could not agree more, that the patent offices of the world do not think of patients as their customers, right? They think of patentees. They think of people who are seeking those patents as being their customers. And that kind of makes sense. The job of this patent office in their minds is to grant patents. But I think equally important is their role in terms of their role with society. Equally important are those times when they choose not to grant patents. And you can see a very stark difference between the kinds of patent obstacles that European patients are facing and that US patients are facing, because the European Patent Office has been much stricter on making sure that the bargain of the patent has been struck properly. I'm not saying it's perfect, but if you compare that product I was looking at before that I showed you the landscape of, in Europe, we can see that there are maybe 30 patents. In the US, on that same product, on those same inventions, there's already 53 granted patents and there are 129 waiting in the wings. The issue for me as a patient is, sitting in the job that I do, you are so dependent on when you get access to that competition, on companies like Sandoz being able to continue to afford having those fights. So I really encourage you to engage with your patent officers and to make sure that they understand that their work saying no is just as important as their work saying yes when it comes to patents. Thanks, Aoife.
Thank you, Julia. That was an incredibly informative and really help us understand the complexity of the patent issues and their direct impact on patient access. I'm sure we'll have questions for you during our panel discussion. For our audience, please don't forget that you can submit questions anytime in the Q&A box. So next off, we'll hear from someone who has been putting this knowledge into action. Cheryl Cohen is the founder and president of the Arthritis Consumer Expert, or ACE, based in Canada. For over 2 decades, Cheryl has been a pioneering voice in patient advocacy, particularly in the area of medication access. She has successfully integrated patent advocacy into ACE's work, making complex patent-related issues accessible and actionable for patient communities. Cheryl has directly engaged with policymakers on patent reform and has developed innovative education campaigns, including the Patient and Patent Initiative, which she's going to talk us through today. Over to you, Cheryl.
Thank you so much, Ava. Great to see and hear from you again, Julia, and it was really good to hear Sneha's talk as well. I am going to shove an hour talk into 15 minutes. Let's see how I do, so that there's lots of time for Q&A. This work couldn't be done. We're the case study of this panel. We're taking the expertise of Julia, the great policy work being done by Generation Patient, and we're showing you how we in Canada and will in the US and in Australia roll out a grassroots campaign that is focused on education on pharmaceutical patents, and it's called Patients and Patents. Pretty simple. I'm going to give you a quick overview of phase 1 and phase 2. Going to talk to you a little bit about where we're at with phase 1 launch results. Again, overview what we're planning for phase 2, and then talk to you very briefly about how to get involved. So what brought us here was not dissimilar actually from where Sneha's group sort of came to this conversation. It was looking around us and seeing what was happening in our very community. I have rheumatoid arthritis. I've had it for 36 years. I founded ACE. We represent 50,000 people in Canada. We're the largest patient organization led by, for, and with people with arthritis in the country. I would argue probably around the world at that size. And that means we've been around a long time. We've had a lot of successes that have been just in their aim, and we've also been whacked, not in nice ways. And all of the work we do is really aimed at advocating for healthcare system change to help overcome myriad access challenges to quality and affordable medications. And we talk about best health in our shop. It's not just, are my joints feeling better? Am I doing well in life? Is my mental health well, which is greatly impacted by disease? These are the things that we do with our membership and with our partners in our chronic disease community, even beyond arthritis. We've argued for access, talking about making access happen. I think Zorana used that phrase and talked about the origin of making access happen. In 2000, that was the year we founded. We advocated to Health Canada to break the review logjam of the first two originators. They were the longest regulatory review, those two products, in Canada's history. People with HIV were dying. Of course, biologics were used in their space. These were saving our lives in clinical trials, but we couldn't get access to them because reviewers were nervous. They didn't believe the incredible phase 3 results they were seeing. This is the power of originators, right? Changing the landscape for someone like me. And we led to hasten that very long delay process. In 2009, we began looking at the ramping up of all of the things that Julia just talked about. She focused in on one, but you saw that huge constellation of methodology, basically, to delay access and increase profit. We watched and learned over that period of time as we saw biosimilars being developed, knowing they would be powerful additions to our medicine chest because of their affordability and maintained quality and efficacy. We knew more people who could never get access to these medicines were going to find their way to them once the patents expired, but that didn't really happen. On the next slide, you heard some of these things certainly from Sneha. You definitely heard from Julie about this. And I don't mean to adalimumab bash, but it's such a shining example of where things go wrong in the patent office and in legal back rooms to patients. The history of adalimumab is a fantastic one. It changed and saved lives in my space. But over its time in the market, AbbVie has now amassed a patent portfolio of 132 patents for the purpose of delaying the biosimilar competition that was being developed. The terms in Julia's world, patent thicket, there's a picture of it. If you're a patient, imagine trying to crawl through that to get access to something that's going to save or change your life. It's incredible. Makes me want to cry. But they were successful in delaying biosimilars until 2023, 7 years after its primary patents expired. And in that period of time, $100 tidy billion was made in sales. Why is this important to us? I'm speaking here directly to the patients in this virtual environment today. The Humira patent manipulation is not an isolated case. I know 2018 is a while ago, but even back then, 100 best-selling medications found that rather than creating new medicines, the companies that made them were largely recycling and repurposing. This is not the kind of breakthrough medicine that needs to happen. We're so far from cures in my disease. There's lots of room for innovation in my disease area. I will always talk about the devil I know best, and that's arthritis, mostly inflammatory arthritis. I live with it. Nearly 80% of the drugs that were associated with new patents weren't new drugs, but existing ones. And that received additional patents, this patent thicket, think about that image as we go through these slides, to extend what is a monopoly. When you work actively to block competition, that is a monopoly. I found this video and I thought it's the classic example of what happens to healthcare dollars. What happens to my dollars? They go up in flame because we're not getting value, the kind of value we should be getting in a post-patent world. Why it happens at the grassroots level, why this matters? This is why. The top slide on your left is early rheumatoid arthritis. It's someone who clearly is young. I'm not going to show you my hands because they're clearly not young. And the person on the right, that's established long-term rheumatoid arthritis. But I'm here to tell you, I've written a book on rheumatoid arthritis published by Oxford University Press. The slide on the left, those hands become the slide on the right when they are untreated, undertreated, or not treated in a timely manner. This can happen, irreversible joint damage in 6 weeks. Not 7 years, not 3 years, not 1 year, 6 weeks. The X-ray damage, try walking with those feet. Those knees are new onset. I know this personally, so do millions of others around the world. Those are inflamed knee joints, and that is a young person. This disease affects people who are 18, 19, all the way up to 80. But the heart of our diagnosis is in the prime of our lives. I didn't get a prime of life. So what do we do about it? I live my life by the words of Martin Luther King. Our lives begin to end the day we become silent about things that matter. Patent manipulation matters to patients. We don't have to be expert at patent law. That's Julia's job. That's policymakers' jobs, right? Our job is to understand how it impacts our health at a daily level, right? So I am so happy in the remainder of my time to tell you about the campaign, Patients and Patents, that ACE, the organization I'm so privileged to work for, Crohn's and Colitis Foundation of the US and the Australian Patient Advocacy Alliance in Australia, we formed an alliance. We formed a true partnership this summer to publicly enter this important conversation. We did so because we were exposed to data. We're all data freaks. We love to consume information. That's our job, really, as patient organization leaders. And we love to turn it around in patient-facing ways that is consumable so that people can actually increase their literacy on patents, but more importantly, increase their health literacy. Health literacy is where knowledge turns to action. And that's what this campaign is all about. So we created this campaign. This will be available to you in the slides, the links, you'll see them at the end as well. So what is it? What is Patients and Patents? What are the objectives? Two really clear objectives. It's education. You can't go in front of Senate and argue unless you have arguments to make. And you need data, you need conviction, you need confidence, all those things that Sneha talked about in her presentation. And it's all focused on affordable medicines, generics and biosimilar biologics. It's to bridge the knowledge gap by the knowledge between the patient organization that acquires that knowledge, as it should as leaders in the community, and then translates and disseminates it out into the grassroots. What this isn't, I thought this was a very important point on an objective slide, this is not an anti-originators brand new medicines campaign, full stop. This is a pro-fairness in patent law campaign that supports pharmaceutical innovation on the one hand, doing things in a fair, legitimate, profit-making, profit-reinvesting way, and allows for affordable medicines to enter into the marketplace to serve the best interests of patients and their health. The elements of the campaign are really standard for a lot of us here in this virtual room together. Advocacy is our middle name. We know how to structure a campaign. The idea of taking a complex topic, we wanted to boil it down into bite-sized actionable steps. We researched and acquired knowledge. We backed that up with data. Thanks to Sandoz and other IP experts who gave us their time and energy. We can't be more grateful for that. We fact-checked you as well, so we know it's the truth, as is our way. And we made it very specific to Australia, Canada, and the US to begin with. Pardon me, I'm suffering from a cold. We developed targeted communication pieces, a social media campaign, and post deck to make it easy for our members. We then activated and measured, excuse me. And of course, we began the process of recruiting. Next slide. Our audiences are here before you. Patients served by our organizations were primary audience. 1, healthcare professionals, they sit by our side every day. They are our informants. They are our partners. They also treat us. We need them on board and on side, right? The general public, super important. Just imagine, would patent thickets, patent manipulation, and any of those things on the constellation Julia showed you exist if the public knew better? Probably not. Because the public in a democracy speaks, and they can speak loudly, and that's our goal. We talked to elected officials, senior bureaucrats in the pharmaceutical policymaking, and patient organizations who wanted to get involved. Next slide. Our calls to action are before you, very clear. Learn, 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 learn. You can never know enough. Share the campaign resources. We're going to give you the link again at the end, and it will be in the recording for you to visit. And rest assured, I'll be following up with you to try to wrangle you into our web of fun around patents and patients and patents. And find and take opportunities to enter the conversation yourself. Opportunities on this topic aren't looking for you. You have to look for opportunities. Next slide. Where to next? Well, we developed phase 2, and we're now beginning the planning phase. It's going to probably launch later than November. It will likely be early December or early January. We want to make sure we have our proverbial ducks in a row, but the development process is much the same as in phase 1. Next slide. The objectives are, these are the elements, so very similar, but different materials, different kind of activation. We'll talk about that in the next slide. And the primary audiences, I want to really highlight the 3rd and 4th bullet because those are new to the audience pool. We are specifically targeting people in governments, people out in the industry who work in IP, and specifically health policymakers. These are the people that sit at their desks who don't see me. They don't see any of you if you're a patient in this virtual room. That's not top of mind, and Julia already touched on that. They're compensated by wins in the courtroom, not by how much more quickly I got or how many fewer joints got damaged. Can I still walk 6 weeks later? Next slide. So our phase 2 calls to action, again, the famous phrase, learn, 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 about the impact patent abuse or manipulation has on patients in our healthcare systems. So this just is not a patient problem, it's a healthcare system problem. Remember that video with burning dollars. We ask you to get involved in the Patients and Patents campaign. We're going wide, we're going global. We want everyone to get involved. The campaign resources are very malleable. They can be adapted to other settings. You can add to the toolkit. That's what we call the package of information that we've developed for anyone who wants to get involved. And we'd like you to share our campaign resources clearly with your membership and social media followers, other patient and healthcare professional organizations inside and outside of your disease, and talk to elected officials. Where we vote is where we have power. Where we have discussions with government is where we have power. So whatever your system of government is, you got to get in there. You got to knock on the door, and you don't get let in right away. We helped the first province in Canada develop biosimilar switch or transition policy. It took us 5 years. But we were the chief driver, along with healthcare professionals, medical professionals, and government in publicly funded healthcare, to develop the policy, to develop how we would get more affordable medicines fairly to the people that needed them. Next slide. So I'm going to stop. You can stop hearing me cough away and listen very briefly to my partners in this incredible campaign, Laura Wingate from Crohn's and Colitis Foundation of the United States, and Deidre McKechnie of Australia Patient Advocacy Alliance. Thrilled for you to watch this little video.
Crohn's and Colitis Foundation just launched our latest strategic plan earlier this year. And in our strategic plan, one of our core objectives is to improve access to care. There are patients in the IBD community that fail every therapy available, or there are patients who can't afford the medication that their doctor's prescribing.
Health literacy is a very significant issue in the lived experience of many patients. And this issue with patents is just one example. So we knew that doing something that would improve the health literacy, improve the knowledge of these issues around intellectual property and patents would actually help patients to more fully participate in their care. Patients are the cornerstone of our healthcare system, and they should not be the passive recipients of what others decide. So they should hold incredible power, but they can only exert that power when it's built on a foundation of knowledge. There will be no change unless we empower the patient voice.
Start with education, because once you have an educated community, policy change can flow more easily from there. And we had this opportunity to create something global that would help organizations like the Crohn's and Colitis Foundation and others do consistent education so that everyone, regardless of disease state, is speaking the same language about patents. And what was nice about working with an arthritis-focused organization, a coalition patient advocacy organization, and an IBD organization, is we brought different perspectives, and we were able to ensure that the education wasn't disease specific, and it speaks globally to our need to reform our systems to protect innovation, absolutely, but don't allow that protection to become a barrier to access.
It has been a fabulous experience working with like-minded people on something so important and so needed. Cheryl and Laura have been amazing, so passionate and keen to make a change.
So any organization could take it and then adapt it, the fundamental core components of the program, to their own country, to their own disease state. We, as the patient facing community, have the power to educate our regulators and governments. So we have the power, and so let's help them understand why the extension of patents has a negative impact on health and wellness of people around the world.
The Patents Project is just one example of the work that we could do together, creating efficiency and a sense of collaboration across the globe. I don't expect this phase to be a revolution, but I do expect it to be the start of one. Think about patents, the impact of patent abuse on access to medicines, and most importantly, think about the impact on access for patients.
Now you know why they're my partners. They're incredible people working so hard.
Thank you so much, Cheryl. And what an inspiring example of how patient advocates can work together across continents to make real change in this area. And I know that you haven't been feeling well, but thank you so much for going through the presentation with your cough as well. Now, we are a bit out of time, so we'll move straight to our panel discussion where we can dive deeper into your questions and explore these topics a little bit further. So let me hand it over back to Zorana, who will be moderating the session.
Thank you, Eva, and I want to thank all three of you for giving such insightful presentations. Sneha showcased how patients are impacted by patents, and especially in the US, and why patient voices are so essential in shaping fairer policies. I think that Julia gave us an explanation of why patents are important for all of us. Patients and companies like Sandoz, but also how there are misuses and how divisional strategies delay access to of affordable medicines to patients. And I think the example that was given by Cheryl on the example of patients and patents campaign is a great and strong example of how patient organizations can lead the way. And we know that now, we have heard that now is the time to discuss this. I know that there are three questions. I have seen them in the Q&A, but I would like to ask Julia first. So you spoke about divisional strategies and other tactics and how they can delay access. And I wanted to ask you if you could highlight just one change that would make the system fairer and improve access, what would it be?
Mm-hmm. It would be to speed up the examination process at the European Patent Office so that if people are filing those divisionals, they get granted and challenged earlier, right? That there are limits on how long you can continue to string out those divisional patents. And also ideally that there are limits on how many of them you can get. We've seen families where there are 6 or 7 that have just been filed in sequence, and it's impossible to whack them on the head in time. So it's about that earlier certainty about what a particular patent family might cover.
Okay, thank you. And Cheryl, I have a question for you. What have been your biggest learnings in building the campaign, and what advice would you give to patient organizations that want to get started?
Yeah, don't be afraid by that thick wall of thorns and branches in front of you. And I'm speaking beyond the patent thicket here. It's easy to say, oh, it's too complicated, and then go home. You really have to roll up your sleeves, and I'm the first person in a room that says, I don't get it. Explain it to me. Tell me what this is about. Make it work in my head. And that's the process that we went through. Our entire senior team at ACE had to break it down in steps and then sort of draw. So that's on one hand. Patent law happens at the furthest end from the bedside, right? It is the furthest end from the bedside. How do we bring the bedside to the patent office? Well, I'm really good at that. Our organization, Crohn's and Colitis Foundation and the Australian Patient Advocacy Alliance are really good about rolling beds to audiences. So it was knowing enough of what Julia knows and others like her, what the abuses are, how they're doing it, how it's unjust, fight for the just and fight against the unjust, and roll ourselves, drag ourselves there to shine a light on the real world examples. I think that Sneha said it best. She talked about, this isn't a golf ball. It's not a yoga mat. These are medicines that have the ability to treat people who cannot afford treatment. Treatment under the WHO, healthcare is a human right. So at the end of the day, and ACE has run human rights campaigns in health, in arthritis, in one particular province who was denying reimbursement for a medication that would change people's lives. And we won. We forced a province to publish on the internet their drug formulary. because it's a matter of public record. So you can do it. No matter how big the wall, you can do it.
I think that's a very good message, Cheryl, and thank you for sharing. We can do it, and I think this is why we are here. So I see 3 questions, and I believe, Julia, they're more for you. So is there a
They're very
governing
technical
body? You
questions.
see them, so can you please answer the
I
questions?
can. Thank you for the insightful questions, Carrie Barnes, wherever you may be. Very much appreciated. So first question, is there a governing body that oversees the Patent Office? Well, the simple answer is yes. In each country, they'll either be governed by typically the Ministry of Justice, whichever organization, either the Ministry of Justice or the Ministry of Economics tends to look after the Patent Office. But I'm a lawyer, I can't give you a simple yes. It's also true to say that probably the biggest patent office in the world, the patent office that covers nearly 700 million patients, the European Patent Office, has the strangest governing organization you could imagine. It is governed, in a sense, by a committee of all of the patent offices that sit within each of the countries that are part of that European Patent Office. So if you want to influence the European Patent Office, you can't just go to the head. You've got to go after the Hydra and to speak to the patent offices in all of the countries, because your local country patent office will have influence on the EPO.
Okay, it's a very complex issues. And then how is I guess, the question is local patent offices are paid nationally by the ministry, and then the European is paid by
the payment question is equally tricky. And this is where, if this was any other organization, the conflict of interest starts to become clear. So the European Patent Office is funded exclusively by the fees. So the fees paid by a patentee for the examination, grant, and maintenance of a patent. The European Patent Office then pays a portion of that money back to the national patent offices, depending on how many patents at Europe designate all of those countries. So when you file a European patent, you can say, I want it to cover 4 out of the 39 countries, right? Very few people do that, but it's mostly full coverage. But those 4 patents will then get those 4 countries that are designated will then get payments from the European Patent Office for that patent. And it's those patent offices that are being paid by the EPO that govern what the EPO does, right? It's a really conflict-ridden organization, and that's part of why when you want to advocate for change at the patent offices, you've got to talk to the ministries. It's a political choice about how to influence those offices.
Okay, thank you, Julia. I think because of the time, we are running out of time. I want to thank all the speakers. I want to thank all the participants.